making the most out of 10 metre drop and turn, so things to consider. So assuming this is a speed event, what I would make sure that you're doing is practicing loads of turns, as simple as anything. If you think that that's an important variable, then obviously it probably is. So assuming that it's a speed event, what I would do, little cues to think of, are making sure that when you hit the line, you see a lot of people, they'll put the weight down, take the time turning round, and then stand back up fully, and then go into the next set. Whereas if it's a moderate weight, and if you're really focusing on time here and grip's not an issue, a thing that I like to focus on is actually keeping low, and actually the cue of staying down. So what I'll often do is I'll put the weight down, and then the angle that I put my back is when I put the weight down, I'll stay down at that angle, so I'm not having to stand up and then readdress the bar. So my hands are staying at the same height. So if the weight's moderate, I would say that use your hands towards the front of the farmers. So this can if you get comfortable with this position and it's not taxing your grip, not only will you have a faster start when you begin, but also it can be faster on the turn, because you could essentially do it with your eyes closed. I've done it with not even looking at the farmers, because I've been aware of where the handles are, and literally you just slide the hands up the handle until you feel a bit of contact, and that's your cue to rip and move on. So obviously drilling this, it depends on the weight that you're going to be doing. Is it going to be on the where on the continuum is it going to be? Is it going to be a pure speed event where you can afford to be almost seemingly reckless and stay really low, be really fast with the hand turn in terms of ramming right to the front of the handles? Or is it going to be grip intensive? If it's going to be grip intensive, then don't worry so much about the turn in terms of speed, focus on being accurate. So if they imagine it's a really maximal set of farmers walks, so a really important thing is that when you get to the other side, you're not just dumping it down and then having to reset the farmers because one's in front of the other or one's falling down to the side. It's actually just getting to the end, putting it down efficiently, turning round, taking your time before the pickup, because you know that it's going to be really good points for you and your ability if you just take your time, because it's actually heavy. So therefore, doing that thing where you make sure you get to the other side and your farmers are set, that can be really useful, and making sure that they're a nice distance apart. How long term should a goal be, or how long can it be? So this is completely infinite. Like you see the cliche things of having 12 a long-term, medium and short-term goal, it being say 12 months, 3 to 6 months, and then it could be a number of weeks. Whereas for you, in your context, is completely individual, and everybody's completely different. So it's all relative. So what I would say is that you do have something that, you know, you could pick any time frame you could pick any time frame out. It could be 10 years down the line, it could be 5 years down the line, it could be a couple of weeks down the line. So in terms of keeping you kind of optimally motivated, and I don't mean necessarily whether you're going to do X, Y or Z or not, but actually when you do the things that you're going to do anyway, like how optimal your mindset is when you're doing them. So instead of just doing things robotically, say using myself as an example, like if I'm working towards like a long-term goal, I don't need short-term goals in place to keep me motivated to whether do it or not. But I like having short-term things in place to give me kind of enhanced motivation whenever I do anything. So this might be like, say for instance for me now, I've my next major competition that I'm going to do it's going to be 6 months away. So it's going to be a competition that I qualified for recently. That's going to be the big goal now. So in terms of, well, you could even say that's medium term. As a longer term goal, like say in the next 5 years, I want to be a world champion within strongman. So that's like a 5-year goal. And then obviously I've broken it down into smaller achievable goals. So what would be a shorter term goal in terms of competing would be maybe I'll get some competitions in the next couple of months. So some of those competitions where I'll just kind of turn up for. I won't put too much pressure on. My focus on the minute is actually in this next block of training, because I don't need to be super specific. I don't need to be chasing big weights for a while. Actually in the next block of training, the goal is to just get to back to progressively overloading on the kind of staple events and exercises, and just generally get stronger and fitter and my body more balanced. So actually getting like a short-term goal in place, like say an easy comp, and I don't mean an easy comp in terms of like super light or a comp that you're going to win, but I mean something that you can, that's not going to steal too much specific training time, something that you feel like you could just turn up for and recover well from. And stuff like that for me, because I'm used to playing sport all my life, like every week all my life, like stuff like that's really important for me, because like it keeps me engaged and keeps it fun. So you do see some people on the other end of the spectrum and just kind of really motivated by the short term things, like going from comp to comp and just having fun in the short term, but not really working towards something big. Or it doesn't even have to be big, but something longer term that takes a bit more working towards consistently. So I would say have something a little bit deeper in the future. And if somebody says that longer term is a year, and that's long term, don't feel that that's like a limit, that like you can't go beyond that. Like just think, what do you want to be doing in 5 years time? Say I'll take mine a step further. 5 years time, I want to be a world champion in strongman. 10 years time, I want to be competing in strongman, because that's enough of a goal for me, because in 10 years time, if I'm still competing, like I've obviously taken a lot of steps right in terms of longevity and keeping my health right and fitness good and stuff like that. So for me, that's a brilliant goal. And in 20 years time, I still want to be competing in a sport or doing what I don't want to be held back by physical or psychological limitations, and that could be my long term, like a real long term goal. So I challenge yourself to look beyond what your definition you've heard before of long term is, and go way beyond that and see what you can come up with. Overhead medley tips. So if you're training for an overhead medley that's pretty heavy, and you're going for aiming to get one of each implement, I find it really important to assess, and like at the start of a training block, so say for instance you train for a competition and you're 6 weeks out, 8 weeks out, I actually find it really important, not essential, but really valuable to get a test at comp weight and see what you can do, because something written down on paper can be completely different to what it is in practice. So just because you see some numbers that are achievable on paper, put them together as a sequence, and you might find it really challenging. So you're only gonna find this out by testing it to an extent, and what you might find is that the test reveals that a certain area needs a little bit more work than what you thought, and then an area that you were a bit nervous about, maybe that felt a bit easier. So what I would do is use that, see what it reveals, see what you need to work on individually, and see where you need to put the rest of your practice to. And then, say for instance you're doing like a log into axle or whatever. Axle feels great by itself, but when you do a log before it feels really tough. And then you've got dumbbell as the third implement, but the dumbbell feels great. Like I would be practicing the kind of the log into the axle sequence. If you feel like you always get the log, but the axle feels more difficult, I'd be practicing the log into the axle sequence, and then I'd be getting more individual singles volume, or maybe even doubles, like on the axle, and just biasing your training to the thing that's going to give you the biggest returns on the competition day. So if realistically you're looking at an event where you'll be pleased to actually finish it, So what I would say is use your time, maximise your time, and practice maximising your time. So little tips on this that, or for anything where we can actually get logic to overtake emotion, like cash in on that if you can. So an example how you can do it on this would be, a big problem that I see is like people having a strategy and then they come to comp day and then they go out of the window with the strategy because they get distracted about other people that have gone before or someone else's head to head, and they do the first rep and it feels easier than in training, so they get kind of carried away and then go too fast into the next rep. And so what I would say is you use strategy and stick to the logic. So if you know that you'll be really, really pleased if you can finish that, if you can get that last rep of the medley in the last second, complete it and beat everybody else that doesn't complete it, then stick to that strategy. Don't get distracted on the day. So a thing that I've used at competitions that I haven't seen other people do is actually take a clock with you, and take a little clock that or a big one in my case so I can see it well, and put it in front of you and use that clock as reference. So you're not thinking, oh yeah, how long has gone or whatever. Just use the clock, especially if you've got plenty of time and you're not trying to stick to a certain rhythm. For instance, you're just actually wanting to see how long you have left exactly. So you use the clock. If you're not confident enough to do that, then ask the referee to. Most of the times the referee will count your requests and just say, can you give me a shout every 15 seconds? Yep, no problem. So that can be really, really good for pace setting. Or just ask a mate. And ask a mate, ideally someone you train with so they get it. And just say, right, can you shout out 10-second blocks or 8-second blocks so I know exactly how long I've got. Or you could even plan it down to the T. So you could say, right, well, I'm going to go on to the second implement at 15 seconds, going to go on the third implement at 35 seconds, and then I'm going to go on to implement 4 at 50 seconds, and just get your mate to shout them out. So if you're doing all this strategy and you're still missing towards the end, then obviously just set your goals appropriately, like doing high percentage weights on 3 to 4 implements and expecting to get all of them. It's a tough ask. So if you're doing all that using all that kind of strategy, like just maybe change your technique a little bit in terms of strategy and think, right, well, if I put all those 4 together, I'm risking failing. How confident would you be at getting a really fast 3, and then potentially having a go at the 4th anyway when like if you get the fast 3 in efficiently? But have a look, because fast 3 might get you really good points. So strategy is key. How do I approach warm-up sets? So say for instance we're building up in set to 5, then it is definitely valuable to warm up, to do sets of 5 on the way up. But what you might find is that some people, say you're working up to a top set of 5 for instance, if you do set to 5 all the way up, you may get to the point where you're fatiguing a little bit before that top set. So I see a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll build up in singles or doubles to preserve their energy for that top set. But what I would say is that it's definitely important to make sure that you're getting the skill practice of doing the specific, like what you're going to do for a set of 5 in terms of skill is going to feel different to what you're doing to a single. So we'll take, say, log for instance. So if you're doing a top set of 5 on log, I would do at least a set of 5 to warm up, like a really light to moderate weight, so it's not taxing you and taking from your top end set. But as you're building up, I would do at least doubles, because what you're doing if you're getting doubles, you're at least practicing that second rep, which is going to be technically the same as the 3rd, the 4th and the 5th rep, in terms of the fact that it comes after a rep and comes from doing the eccentric of the first. So in terms of skill, you're practicing the same thing. So if for instance you just, like say, building up in singles to preserve energy, I like the logic, you are going to be preserving energy somewhat, but you go for that top set 5 and probably that second rep after you've lowered the the first one down to the ground, for instance, is gonna be a bit more energy costly than if you've worked out like how the eccentric feels and putting the log in the correct position as you go along. So yeah, I would say definitely do a little bit of work in the desired rep range that you're going to do for your top set as you're building up. Or say, for instance, if I'm doing like an event at, say, a comp, I always get some funny looks, but if I'm doing 40 meters farmers, for instance, I'll do 40 meters to warm up as at least part of my warm up, for instance. So because of the specificity, and because obviously it's gonna be transferable to what you're doing, but we don't want to do too much. I won't do like 3 or 4 sets of 40 meters because obviously I'm pacing myself over the whole comp. But going back to that point that I've said before, like if you record your time, say you do 3 sets of 40 meters, sub-maximal but challenging weight in training, do record your times, I suspect that most of us will improve in terms of the time will reduce as we go along. So even though we might get to that 3rd set and we feel fatigued, that like very often you get into the deeper into the sets, and the quality of the sets is improving. So yeah, don't be afraid to do that at competition. It's finding that sweet spot for you. We want to stay away from accumulating too much fatigue, obviously, but we want to get that kind of specificity exposure. Difference between push pressing and power jerking in terms of mechanics. Is there a difference on dumbbell? Is there a difference on log? So no, there shouldn't be a difference mechanically. The rack position, the dip, the drive should be identical. So we'll take the dumbbell for instance, and we'll go, so if I establish my ideal rack position, and what we should be doing is making sure that we dip as a non-negotiable. The dumbbell should be dipping vertically in a straight line, and then as we begin the drive up, the object should be moving vertically as we extend up. As we explode through the lower body, the object should be moving vertically here. Explode up through the lower body, the dumbbell, you explode so hard into the dumbbell or the object or the log or the axle that the object leaves your body in a straight line vertically. And then from this position, what you have to do is decide before the lift, obviously not during, but you decide from this position, what do we want to do? Do we want to use the upper body to press up and keep the body fully locked, or do we rebend the knee, rebend the hips somewhat, and allow yourself to push into the dumbbell and then receive in the position there with the arms locked overhead? So basically the difference between the push press and the power jerk is that you're trading with a push press using your upper body to finish the lift. With the power jerk, you're using your lower body to reflex, rebend, to allow your body to move underneath the object in a stable position with your joints stacked on top of each other. So if you imagine the dumbbell there, should be through the center of my body, through my elbow, through my shoulder, stacked on my spine, middle of my hips, etc. And the principle stays the same with the log or the axle. So the push press should just be extend and finish up. The power jerk should be extend and drop. The best and most efficient way to move an axle from either resting on the torso or resting on the belt to receiving on the shoulders. So a common error that you see in axle is that you see that people put too much weight through the heels, the legs are straight like this, and the weights, the shoulders are going behind where the bar's resting like that. So if you wanted to power up and produce force in that position, what you can do, because you'll often have people with like soft hips in this position, you'll be able to get a little bit of hip extension sometimes, but a lot of the power is just coming from the back extension, and then once you've run out of that in terms of your lower body's fully extended, your back's fully extended, so the only place that you can have to go is like kind of muscling it with the upper body. So you're just limiting yourself in terms of potential there, because you're just eliminating the amount of muscle groups, the amount of powerful muscle groups that you can use. So what we want to do instead is when we keep this the object or the axle wrapped either on the torso or the belt, what we want to do is get as much weight we can forward and towards the ball of our feet if we can. Because if we're able to go towards the ball of our feet, what we'll be able to do now is extend up. And what we'll be able to do, just by changing our foot distribution, our weight distribution, we'll be able to, now we're allowing ourselves to use the ankles and the calves to extend the ankles. You're going to have a little bit more flex at the knee, so you're going to be able to use the quad to extend, and also you're going to be able to extend more powerfully with the hips. So because you're putting yourself in a position to produce force with these three joints, what you're going to be able to do is not only is the power going to go from just going kind of out in front and dragging up with the upper body, but from just this slight positional change in terms of the distribution of the feet, what you're going to do is when you look to explode and produce force powerfully, not only is the weight going to be more explosive because you've got more muscle groups that are doing the job, the power is going to go up, and it's going to be a lot better to go vertically. So a way that you can test this yourself, so if you, wherever you are now, standing on the floor, curl your toes up off the floor, and then just dip down like you're doing like an eighth of a squat, say, for instance, and then from that position jump up and see where the power distribution's going, and see what happens with the body. And then instead, now go to the point where your heels feel like they're about to peel off the ground. So wait through the balls of your feet or toes a little bit. Get to the point where your heels just feel like they're just about to peel off the ground, but they don't quite do it. And then from this position, now allow yourself to flex into like an eighth of a squat, and now forcefully extend. And you'll probably feel not only that you feel instantly more powerful, but you're going to have more power vertical, which is the aim of the game. So I would even say to prioritize, like, actually get good with light weights producing force vertically, because we pop it up vertically, then all we've got to do is turn over the body to receive it and catch or whatever in the rack position. And then you can add speed and power to that as you go along. Whereas actually just being powerful and then trying to kind of alter your technique when you're moving so fast can be quite difficult. So I would say prioritize the position first, and then add load patiently and speed, and just take a note of where your technique starts to change, and then just work below that threshold. And yeah, so another little thing to note as well, you may find this a lot more difficult with the wearing elbow sleeves, because it's a lot harder to achieve this kind of position here, because the next thing in the chain, so obviously if we're using the power from the lower body and we get that producing in a lot better position vertically, what we need to do to make sure that, so that's going to take care of from the belt or the tummy to, say, the sternum height. So what we need to do when we get to this height is make sure that we can turn over the elbows as fast as possible. So whilst we're being as close as possible to the body. So we want the bar to imagine the bar's here, and what we want to do here is rotate underneath and receive underneath. So what a big error that you see is people with the elbows back, weight through the heels, and then the axle gets to about here, and then it has to be pushed out in front because of often because of flexibility issues. People are internally rotated at the shoulders, so their elbow has to go back, which in turn sends the axle out here, which is a nightmare. Number two, you can be making this difficult for yourself by actually wearing your elbow sleeves. You may actually find that to learn this skill of this new position, you may actually find that ditching the elbow sleeves for a few sessions will help you achieve this kind of this position better, where we explode up and we can turn over better here and rotate and catch. So yeah, in terms of like comparing, is it different from a max or it is to reps? No, I would say be consistent with this, where this position is just going to be more efficient all the way through. So weight through the toes rather than the heels. Power going vertically up instead of pulling back. Elbows forward a little bit. So that's going to allow you to the range of motion to come up here before you turn over. If your elbows are back, then the bar's always going to be pushed forward and you're always going to be taken there. And try without the elbow sleeves and you'll have an easier time receiving. Ways to manage shin splints for moving event training. So if you're getting this tibialis anterior pain, I would generally say generally trying to strengthen that is going to be beneficial. So doing stuff like, say, raises, you could do it with a dumbbell at the front of your foot, and that's just really going to strengthen that muscle in isolation. But what I would say that obviously that's going to strengthen the specific muscle in isolation. So the other thing is building resilience within that tissue in terms of whilst doing the specific movement that you want to do. So in terms of moving events, that's a big thing in terms of scaling your program appropriately. A big thing where I see people go wrong, I suppose, with moving events is they kind of back off a little bit when they're not training for like a specific comp, and then they get to a competition phase and like, oh, well, I need to be doing X amount of weight at this comp, so I'm going to have to go to 80% of comp weight, 90% of comp weight, and simply put, they're just skipping phases. So build up the conditioning through a patient program year round. So obviously getting your exposure to the specific events and stuff is great, but for people who can't do that, people who train at home, for instance, just even just getting hold of a sandbag can be really beneficial. Something that you can just march up and down and get some volume in without having to set up the farmers or a yoke or whatever. That can be great for building up the conditioning. If you need to take it a step further back than that, if that's causing issues, like just actually getting out walking and then building up walking into a jog, and then transitioning from like a jogging phase into introducing the moving events in terms of specific positions, but still only jogging. So like say like a light pair of dumbbells. So basically you're progressing your jogging that you're recovering from to actually holding like say a pair of 5 kilo dumbbells. So you're not doing it for the load principle in terms of grip. You're doing it to learn how to use your body whilst your upper body's redundant down by your sides, and how to move without aggravating your shins basically. So obviously you could do this with a yoke. I've done it for a phase where I've just done it with a stick, and I've done sprints and running and different built up, done like a basic conditioning progressive program, but with holding a stick in position to simulate the yoke position. Simulate the hand position that you're going to be while you're doing yoke. I've done it with an empty keg. I've done it with like a medicine ball to simulate front carries. So because your lower body does get impacted in a slightly different way with your arms redundant in these different positions. So I would say build that up before you start adding load to these specific positions. So the other thing what you could do is, if you're kind of in a, like say that'd be more maybe like an off-season phase. But if you're like say 12 weeks out from a comp and they've got moving events, or 8 weeks out or whatever, you don't want to be going. You want to be delaying how like working at the high percentages to the last 4 to 6 weeks. What you might find beneficial is throwing in like a secondary day where you do like your moving events on your moving event day or whatever, and then a secondary day where you could just be doing like say marching. You could be doing marching holds like this in a rack. You could do this at home. You could do this at your local gym. You were doing barbell marches instead of the yoke, assuming that logistically exposure to the yoke 2 or 3 times a week isn't going to be achievable. So yeah, I would say strategically build up that specific exposure over time, and hopefully that's giving you some ideas at how you can build it up on the continuum. Spinal flexion on deadlifts. Would I ever cue it for somebody to fix, like, say, hip shooting up, for instance? So cueing spinal flexion obviously is a bit of a debated topic. So I think context is key. So if you use like a general population client or whatever, I would just get them within the realms of neutral. So you'll find that some people are like kind of posteriorly tilted at the pelvis, of which cueing them more into extension may be better for them, and then strengthening that. You might have people who spend a lot of time on the feet and they're extended, and they go down to deadlift and they kind of butt sticking out a lot, and you might cue them you have to cue them to tuck the tailbone under a little bit to find that more neutral position, or get them within a neutral range at the spine. So I would say for general population, get them within neutral, and then get them strong and skillful at displaying their strength whilst maintaining neutral spine. If in the context of a strongman athlete, I would say look at what you're going to do in terms of, or what you plan to do at the say your competition, for instance, with no intervention, with no kind of nobody giving you feedback, nobody giving you kind of, just basically what you're going to do without thinking on the deadlift event. Analyze the deadlift event. Analyze whether you're gonna, or say your most recent deadlift event. Analyze that, and then analyze your strategy going into the next one. So if this strategy involves, say, allowing your back to round within and like say you can recover from it really well or whatever, and you're going to do it anyway. So what I would say is like optimize that in terms of, optimizing that is going to be good for A, performance, but B, in my opinion, like an injury perspective. So what I would prioritize over everything on deadlift, and pretty much every lift actually, but we'll use deadlift and look from the side. What we want to do, regardless of the height that you're pulling from, that bar needs to be moving in a straight line. That is a non-negotiable. So find that as priority number 1. Priority number 2 is making sure for kind of longevity and injury reduction risk. In my opinion, the number 2 thing that we should be looking for is trying to find a position with your torso that you can maintain at every part of the lift. So as you break it off the floor, we want to be minimizing moving of the torso under load. So with a lot of people, this is counterintuitive, but I've had a lot of success with people I coach deadlift in actually getting them into a position that realistically they can maintain throughout the lift, and then building up strength and resilience through a kind of structured, progressive program within that position. So I would much rather people find it counterintuitive, but they might actually, if they're finding that the bar path's okay, but as they initiate the pull, the shoulders being pulled over the bar, the back starting to round, etc. throughout the pull, you may find that a lot of people just actually, like, assuming that your bar path and the initiation of the position is good, like, you may actually find that you're just trying to hold a position that you're not strong in. That basically, if you're getting pulled into this kind of into this flex position, that's very often, in my opinion, my experience, a message that you're pretty strong in flexion. So it's up to you. You can either get strong in getting strong at holding a more extended position and be really patient with the program, or you can embrace your strengths and actually look at, say, right, well, okay, if I set up with what happens if I set up with a slightly more flex position, if I set up with my ribs down a little bit? What about if I set up with a little bit of T-spine rounding? How does this feel? And also do the slow-mo of like how do you find that your back position is to maintain at 50%? Does it feel easier? Does it feel like your 50% is easier than 50% usually? What about when you go up to 70, 75, 80%? Does it feel like you're fighting this urge of being pulled out of position? Does it mean that you're fighting that urge less? Because if it does, then maybe this is something to explore. So again, well, I'm just providing you with, I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just providing with you tools to open up your mind and hopefully give you some things to explore, and you just need to make up your own mind with that. But yeah, certainly for some people in the past, I've used that as a cue. It's a cue that I'm thinking of at the minute. Is I'm actually thinking my best pulls at the minute, and in terms of efficiency and pain in my glute area that I've been managing an issue with for a while, that like the rehab professionals that I've dealt with are actually saying that even though that I set up with like a kind of rounded T-spine, like my lumbar spine is actually quite stiff and quite stuck into extension, and it doesn't want to flex. What's like the flexion range of motion, it doesn't really want to be there. So that's a thing that I'm cueing at the minute. I'm actually cueing not to overly flex at the T-spine, but at the lumbar to actually get to push my ribs down more and get a little bit more posterior tilt. And then when I spend lots of time loosening up my lower back and achieving this position, and what feels like in a deadlift start position, I'm almost rounding at my lower back more than I ever would like to, the efficiency of any given weight feels a lot better, and the incidence of pain is significantly reduced in terms of my glute issue. So that obviously that's just personal evidence, but that's a thing that I often see is people trying to set up in a position that's not suited for their strengths and their makeup, and it being okay 60, 70%, 70, 80%, they may be starting to fight being pulled out of position, and then they go over 80, 85, 90% and just turn a blind eye and just think, oh well, I'll work on my technique in my next phase. Whereas actually, if you're just setting up with a little bit closer to the position that you're being pulled into, can give you a massive return of benefits in terms of bar path, efficiency, and also possibly, the jury's out, but possibly injury prevention reduction. I'm mastering the dip and drive on log. So video your log from the side. Look through the centre of the pins, and then in the rack position, and then make sure that that's aligned with the middle of your foot as number one. So make sure you can establish a really good rack position. So what I would find to get the angle of the handles right, I would do a push press overhead, or even a set of push presses. Do a set of light push presses that feel really good, and then a controlled eccentric to the rack each time, and then use that as your indicator of where your pin should be. And then obviously what you can do from here is let your log roll down to the hip, and that's the angle that you should start the clean at. But in terms of dip and drive, and making sure that you're optimizing this, get the rack position first. So doing the slow eccentrics from overhead will teach you how to get that ideal rack position. But then from there, what we want to do is, once we've ticked off the rack, is just do a controlled dip. So video yourself from the side, dip down, and make sure that you can dip with a perfectly vertical torso with the pins going through the center of the foot. And then from there, once you've ticked that off and make sure you've slow-moed it and make sure you feel it's perfect, the pins are through the middle of your foot, move on to the next progression, which is starting the drive. So now drive up, see what happens when you do go from a controlled eccentric to actually a fast concentric. what happens there? Does the log roll forward there as you begin the drive? That's a common error. What you want to do is make sure that you can transition into putting the power into the concentric whilst maintaining this vertical path. If you learn how to do that, then the log's going to feel great. The reason why the log feels a little bit more difficult than the axle and the barbell is just because the center of mass of the object is a little bit further forward than the axle or the dumbbell. The axle or the barbell. So therefore, it's rather than you're looking at it a bit as more difficult, it's actually just giving you a less margin for error if your dip is wrong. So you could be dipping with an axle or a barbell. The thinner the diameter, you're going to get more give with a barbell. But you do a poorer dip with a barbell, and you can get out of jail. You can get away with it somewhat. It's not going to highlight the error as much as a bigger object that comes further away that once he dips out. So video from the side. Make sure the rack position's perfect and aligned with midfoot, through the centre of the pins. Then progress to getting the perfect dip, and then progress to doing the drive, and watch your log blow up.